You know, under that section 6, about halfway down.
Settlement agreement?
Yeah, on the settlement agreement. In reference to the question that you had before, it is a little odd, but it does say that the PBC further agrees that if an expansion team is approved by the NBA within the next 5 years to play in renovated Key Arena, then the owner of each team and the PBC are free to use and refer to the Sonics history, statistics, player histories, and records during the NBA seasons prior to the date of this MOU that the Sonics played in Seattle. PBC further agrees to the extent requested by a new team owner, it will transfer at no cost the team's banners, trophies, retired jerseys to such owner, providing that such owner acknowledges the memorabilia as shared history. So I guess I read that they get to use the statistics now until there's another team.
I read that differently.
Did you?
In fact,
well, you're the lawyer, so.
No, the language you read I had underlined here because, and I was a little shocked and disappointed that I'm looking back at the old stats, and where Seattle once was, it's plastered with Oklahoma. And I was reading that as to say that, you know, within 5 years, if we don't get a team, then they can start using it sort of interchangeably. It's sort of, quite frankly, it's a little ambiguously worded, and so so I went back to Section 5 to see, quite frankly, whether we had any ability not to terminate the lease, to keep the lease in place until we make sure the settlement agreement is a good, solid agreement, because if you look at Section 1 and Section 2, it's very clear that another settlement agreement is forthcoming in August 1st. And so in a perfect world, then we would not have terminated our lease until the August 1st agreement is executed. We're not doing that here because what's going to sort of carry the day is Section 5, which lists today, July 14th, as the drop dead date that we have to do that. So I'm going to support the termination because the way this is structured, we really don't have a choice. Otherwise, we're walking away from $45 million that I don't think anyone would want to do. But it seems, again, to me that we would have structured this a little differently. We would have waited until all of this stuff is clear, till the final agreement was put in place on August 1st, 2008, and then we would have terminated the lease. But again, the way this is drafted to me, I think our hands are a little tied.
Okay, let me ask you another question.
Sure.
Okay, we are giving you, as president of the city council, the authority to execute this settlement agreement memorandum of understanding dated July 2nd. What about the one that's forthcoming on August 1st? That's not referenced in here.
You know, you're right. That is not referenced in here. And the one that is on August 1st is intended to be substantially in accord, as I recollect the wording is. Parties agree to complete the settlement agreement no later than August 1st. Yeah. So essentially, you're right. It looks like that is not something that the council would be asked to approve,
Yeah.
or that I would be signing.
And Councilman Drago, to your earlier point, I think it's clear at this point that they are not, PBC was not to use the statistics unless we are not granted a team within 5 years. I'm reading this. PBC further agrees that if an expansion team is approved by the NBA within the next 5 years to play in a renovated Key Arena, then the owner of such team and the PBC are free to use and refer to the Sonics history.
Okay.
So, but again, ESPN is a third party. We don't have control. They're not standing to any of these agreements, but they're proceeding with our history.
I guess my interpretation of the settlement agreement question is that the agreement is intended to be only working out the details. As it notes, it shall be in all respects consistent with the terms of the MOU. So I don't know that as how important that would be to have the council be a signatory on that settlement agreement, because the MOU really contains all of the key terms. But That's just my interpretation of it at this point. Councilmember Rasmussen.
What I was wondering, I'm so glad that Councilmember Harrell has reviewed this and has brought up some important points. For example, if an organization like ESPN incorrectly lists Oklahoma, who is it that brings that error to their attention? Is it the city that has to do that, or is it Oklahoma? It seems like if the burden is always on the city, we're going to be chasing this frequently, this error, and I think it would be better that it should be Oklahoma that ensures that these kinds of provisions are carried out. And so who is responsible for ensuring that when a third party makes a mistake like that, or either intentionally or does it unintentionally, that they correct that?
I believe the agreement is silent on that, so I can't answer that question. I do want to note that I guess some of the issues that have been brought up here, to me, really reflect the problems with devising a settlement agreement on the run. And that is that, yeah, I mean, the fact is, the settlement agreement, because it is, rather than really settling down and negotiating something out, the settlement agreement was essentially put together very fast over a very short period of time, immediately prior to the deadline set by the judge being prepared to issue a decision. So all of these kind of questions are the sort of thing that, to me, in a methodical and deliberative way, should have been addressed in a more thorough process. And it's a great example of what happens when you actually wind up having to do something rapidly, and you do the best you can, but there are a lot of details that are left that perhaps should have been ironed out in a more careful and thorough manner. That's about all I can comment on it.
It clearly states the settlement agreement will supersede this MOU under number 1.
I'll be very blunt on the point. Maybe I've beat it around the bush a little bit, but the city council was pretty much put in a rock and a hard place on this. The fact of the matter is we were holding hard and fast on our litigation path. We were believing in our legal position, and then a settlement was brought about very quickly toward the end, and in that fine language that I think we were presented with literally hours before the judge was to rule, that language contained a clause in there, number 5, which suggests that if we don't terminate the lease by today, that we walk away from the $45 million. And, we are put in a fairly precarious position when we settle litigation like that, and we are then requiring city council ratification of it sort of a short period of time.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. Are there any other comments? As I said, not a cheerful day. I am going to have to say one more thing, and that is following up on some of the comments that have been made in regards to Key Arena and the Seattle Center. We have also heard that Seattle Center is going to have to, as we know, take account of the fact that they have a number of dates now that they no longer have a game that is scheduled, and that they're going to have to rework all of their concession agreements. They're going to have to rework a whole number of other things that, in order to make the Key Arena function effectively, including signing contracts with people for some of those dates, figuring out how to manage the concessions, figuring out what happens with the naming rights. All of those things are going to be things that Seattle Center may have to act on fairly quickly. So I had originally asked that some consideration be given to including in this ordinance authorization for Seattle Center to actually move forward with some of those things. But because that would have been not necessarily in accord with the title of the ordinance, is my understanding, that's why we did not get those provisions brought in here. But it is something that we're probably going to have to take action on in the near future in order to give the director of Seattle Center the authority he'll need in order to make those, enter into those leases and agreements over the next several months prior to coming up with a sort of final formal plan for how the Key Arena is actually going to operate. So that is something we're probably going to have to, I think it may need another ordinance on our part to allow that authorization. Councilmember McIver?
In which case, should the Seattle City Council retain an attorney to advise them on the actions that be proposed in those other ordinances?
Well, that's a very interesting question, and that is something that we should take under advisement. I agree. Okay. Are we ready to vote? Councilmember Rasmussen.
Well, when you talk about Seattle Center having to scramble to fill those dates, Seattle Center is people, and the employees are affected because they were planning on working those hours and those days, so there is harm there. And to say nothing about all the businesses in the community and around Seattle Center that were depending upon the patrons who would be attending those games. So there will be a lot of people scrambling to figure out what to do next as a result of this.
Definitely, and I guess the only optimistic thing I can say is I know the director of Seattle Center is fully aware of the fact that his job is to try and bring some more events in as quickly as possible and to do that as rapidly as possible to get more activities into the Key Arena. So that's a good thing, but it is definitely going to be a struggle. Okay, please call the roll on the passage of the bill.
Licata.
Aye.
McIver. Rasmussen.
Aye.
Burgess. Drago. Godden. Harrell.
I need a moment. Aye.
President Conlon.
Aye.
8 in favor, none opposed.
The bill passes and the chair will sign it. Are there any comments on the ordinance that would provide for this termination?
It'd been nice to have it in time to read it.